At first glance, he was just another wedding planner, calm, polite, and black, working tirelessly to make someone else's dream day perfect. But when the bride snapped, "You're fired," in front of everyone, humiliating him over a tiny mistake he didn't make, the room fell silent. What no one knew was that he wasn't just a planner. He owned the luxury events company behind half the city's celebrity weddings. And by the end of the night, the arrogant bride who fired him would be the one calling off her own wedding, in utter regret. Before we find out how everything unraveled, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story already hit a nerve, make sure to hit that like button. The air in the Grand Imperial Ballroom was thick with a special kind of chaos. The kind that only exists in the final hour before a $500,000 wedding. It was a symphony of controlled panic. Waitstaff in crisp black uniforms moved like shadows, placing the last of the crystal glasses on tables draped in white silk. The string quartet in the corner nervously tuned their instruments, their soft, discordant notes swallowed by the cavernous space. Guests had begun to trickle in, their expensive perfumes and hushed, excited whispers filling the gilded entrance hall. Cameras from a high-end society magazine flashed intermittently, capturing the early arrivals in their finest attire, their smiles bright and expectant. Everything was meant to project an image of effortless elegance, a seamless fantasy brought to life. But behind the curtain of perfection, the pressure was monumental. Every detail, from the temperature of the champagne to the alignment of the 1,000 tiny candles, was under intense scrutiny. At the center of this swirling vortex of last-minute preparations was Madison Harlow, the bride. Dressed in a sprawling white gown that seemed to consume the light in the room, she was a vision of bridal perfection, if one ignored the storm brewing in her eyes. Her blonde hair was swept up in an intricate style studded with tiny diamonds that caught the light, but her face was a mask of tense displeasure. She stalked through the ballroom, her silk train whispering behind her, her eyes darting from one detail to the next, searching not for beauty, but for flaws. Her lips were pressed into a thin, hard line. She was a general inspecting her troops before the most important battle of her life, and she was not satisfied. Her gaze landed on table 12, and she stopped dead. Her entire body went rigid. A single centerpiece, a towering arrangement of white orchids and hydrangeas, was positioned slightly off-center. It was a minuscule error, a matter of inches, something no guest would ever notice. But to Madison it was a declaration of war. It was an imperfection in her perfect day, an unforgivable stain on the canvas she had spent a year and a fortune creating. "Marcus!" Her voice was not a call but a command, sharp and cold, slicing through the nervous energy of the room. It carried across the vast space, causing several staff members to flinch. Marcus Reed, the wedding planner, turned from his quiet conversation with the head caterer. He moved with a practiced calm, an island of serenity in the turbulent sea of pre-ceremony jitters. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored black suit, his demeanor professional and unassuming. He approached her with a small, reassuring smile, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He had managed hundreds of events just like this one, navigating the emotional minefields of anxious clients with grace and unflappable competence. He had seen it all, or so he thought. "Is there a problem, Madison?" he asked, his voice low and steady, a direct contrast to her rising agitation. She didn't answer. She simply pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the offending table. "That!" she hissed, her voice shaking with a rage that seemed far too large for the minor issue at hand. "What is that?" Marcus followed her gaze. He saw the centerpiece. He noted its slight misalignment. It was a simple fix, a 10-second adjustment. He had already signaled one of the floral assistants, who was now discreetly moving toward the table to correct it. "I see it," he said calmly, turning his attention back to her. "It's being taken care of right now. It will be fixed in less than a minute. I assure you everything will be perfect for when you walk down the aisle." He expected his calm reassurance to soothe her, as it always had with other high-strung clients. But Madison was not other clients. She was not looking for a solution. She was looking for a target. His composure seemed to infuriate her further. She saw it not as professionalism, but as condescension. "Fixed?" she repeated, her voice rising in pitch and volume, drawing the attention of everyone within earshot. The string quartet stopped tuning. The waitstaff paused, silver trays in hand. The early arriving guests in the foyer turned their heads, their curiosity piqued by the sound of conflict. "You think fixed is good enough? This is my wedding day, my once-in-a-lifetime day, and you are ruining it." Her accusation hung in the air, absurd and venomous. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but inside, a quiet switch was flipped. He had dealt with demanding clients, with tearful brides and anxious grooms, but this was different. This was pure, unadulterated contempt. He started to speak again, his voice still even. "Madison, I understand the pressure you're under. Let's just take a breath." She cut him off with a sharp, ugly laugh. "Don't you dare tell me to take a breath," she snarled, stepping closer, invading his personal space. She was a storm of white lace and fury. "I hired professionals. I paid for the best, and I got you. An incompetent amateur who can't even place a flower arrangement correctly." The room had fallen completely silent now. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every eye was on them. The staff stood like statues, their faces a mixture of shock and fear. The groom, Ethan Richardson, stood near the grand entrance, a handsome but weak-willed man in a tailored tuxedo. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his expression deeply uncomfortable. He looked at his fiancée, then at Marcus, his jaw tight. He opened his mouth as if to intervene, to calm the situation, but then he closed it again. He said nothing. His silence was a form of consent, a quiet endorsement of her cruelty. Madison felt the power of the room's captive attention. It fueled her. She took a deep, theatrical breath, puffing out her chest. She wanted a spectacle. She wanted to demonstrate her authority. She looked Marcus up and down, a dismissive sneer twisting her lips. "You're fired!" she screamed. The words echoed in the sudden, profound stillness of the grand ballroom. They were loud, sharp, and brutally clear. They landed with the force of a physical blow. The florist's assistant, who was about to touch the centerpiece, froze, her hand hovering in midair. The head of catering's eyes went wide. Lena, Marcus's young assistant, who was coordinating with the DJ near the dance floor, gasped audibly. She felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. Everyone watched Marcus. They expected him to argue, to defend himself, to show anger or frustration. He did none of those things. He simply stood there for a moment, absorbing the public humiliation without flinching. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. Not hurt, not anger, but a kind of quiet, final assessment. He took a slow, deliberate breath. Then he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of acceptance, but also of finality. Without another word, he turned and began to walk away. His steps were measured and unhurried. He walked past the frozen staff, past the whispering guests, his back straight, his dignity a shield against the venom that had been spat at him. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the hall like a virus. "Did you hear that? She fired him right here? Over a centerpiece?" The room was buzzing with the scandal of it all. The raw, ugly drama that had just gate-crashed the most elegant event of the season. Everyone watched him go, stunned into silence by the sheer injustice of the scene. The man who had orchestrated every detail, who had handled every crisis with quiet dignity for months, was being cast out, humiliated for a triviality, and the bride didn't seem to have a single regret. Marcus walked out of the grand ballroom without looking back. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind him, muffling the rising tide of Madison's renewed, frantic orders. He moved through the gilded foyer, his face a mask of calm. But inside, a cold, hard decision was cementing. He had given her a chance. He had remained professional. He had absorbed her insults, but the final public humiliation was a line that could not be uncrossed. It was no longer about a misplaced centerpiece. It was about a fundamental lack of respect, a cruelty he refused to tolerate within the company he had built from the ground up. He pushed open the large glass doors of the venue and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, leaving the chaos he had so expertly managed to its new, incompetent queen. His young assistant, Lena Cruz, rushed out after him, her face etched with concern and disbelief. "Marcus, wait," she called out, her heels clicking nervously on the stone steps. He stopped in the driveway, turning to face her. He could see the genuine distress in her eyes. Lena was bright, compassionate, and fiercely loyal. She had been with him for 2 years, and he saw a younger version of himself in her, her passion for order, her quiet competence, and her innate sense of fairness. "Marcus, please don't listen to her," Lena said, her voice trembling slightly. "She's just stressed. It's the pressure." She didn't mean it. But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. Madison had meant every single one. Marcus offered a faint, weary smile. It didn't quite reach his eyes. "She meant it, Lena, and that's the problem." He looked back at the grand venue, the sound of the string quartet now faintly audible, a beautiful melody trying to cover an ugly scene. Some people believe that money gives them the right to treat others as less than human. They think service means servitude. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his car keys. The simple metallic jingle seemed to cut through the tension. "You should go back inside. They'll need you," he said. But his tone was detached, as if he were already miles away from the mess. "But what about you? You can't just leave," she pleaded, her sense of order and loyalty in turmoil. "The whole event will fall apart without you." He paused, his hand on the door of his sleek, understated black sedan. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a glint of steel beneath his calm exterior. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low but carrying a surprising weight, "people need to see the value of respect. And sometimes the only way they can see it is to experience what happens when it's gone. They need to learn the hard way." With that, he got into his car. Lena stood on the curb watching him, a profound sense of unease settling over her. She knew this was more than just a planner walking off a job. This was something bigger. Back inside the ballroom, Madison was in her element, or so she thought. With Marcus gone, she had seized control. She was barking orders at everyone, her voice shrill and commanding. "Move that here. No, not there. Over there. Are you deaf?" she snapped at a young waiter. She directed the florist to rearrange 3 other tables, creating a ripple effect of minor adjustments that threw the carefully planned timing into disarray. The florist, the DJ, and the head decorator exchanged worried glances over her head. They were professionals who had worked with Marcus for years. They knew him as the unflappable conductor of a complex orchestra. Madison, in her fury, was like a child banging on a piano, creating nothing but noise and discord. They knew with a sinking certainty that she had just dismissed the one person keeping the entire operation from collapsing into a heap of expensive failure. As the carefully constructed timeline began to unravel, the first real signs of trouble emerged. The DJ couldn't get the sound system to work with the ceremony's specific audio cues. Marcus had the master codes. The lighting technician realized the sequence for the grand entrance was programmed on Marcus's tablet. The coordinator for the live stream video feed couldn't get a signal, and the contact for the venue's IT support was saved in Marcus's phone. Small problems, all easily solvable by the man now driving away from the venue. Marcus drove calmly, his hands steady on the wheel. He didn't speed, he didn't listen to the radio. He drove in silence, the quiet hum of the engine a soothing counterpoint to the ugly scene replaying in his mind. He pulled over a few blocks away, stopping in a quiet, tree-lined street. He took out his phone, but he didn't call another planner to try and save the day. He didn't call his lawyer. He made one discreet call. He scrolled through his contacts to a name simply listed as HQ Legal. A woman answered on the first ring. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "Eleanor," Marcus replied, his tone low but firm, devoid of any emotion. "I need you to do something for me. Put a full, unconditional hold on the Reed and Royale master account for the Harlow Richardson wedding. That's vendor contracts, service agreements, everything. Effective immediately." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Understood, sir. Is there a reason?" Marcus looked out the window at the peaceful street. "Violation of the mutual respect clause in our primary contract. Article 7, Section B. The client terminated the lead planner, publicly. We are terminating the event." "Right away, Mr. Reed," Eleanor said. There was no argument, no hesitation. The order had been given. Marcus ended the call. He put the phone down on the passenger seat. The words he had spoken, effective immediately, hung in the silent car. They were not words of anger or revenge. They were words of consequence. They were the first falling pebble that would trigger an avalanche. The quiet reckoning had begun. The story of Marcus Reed did not begin in a chaotic ballroom. It began a decade earlier in a small, cramped office with a second-hand desk and a borrowed laptop. It was a story of relentless hard work, of an unwavering commitment to quality, and of a deep, abiding belief in the power of respect. This story unfolded a week before the Harlow-Richardson wedding in a place that Madison Harlow could never have imagined her incompetent planner commanding. The headquarters of Reed and Royale Events occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming glass skyscraper in the heart of the city's financial district. The offices were a testament to minimalist luxury. Polished concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic city views, and sleek modern furniture. This was the nerve center of one of the top luxury event firms in the country, a multi-million-dollar empire known for its flawless execution of celebrity weddings, corporate galas, and high-profile charity balls. And at the head of it all was Marcus Reed. A week before the wedding, Marcus sat at the head of a long obsidian conference table. He was not wearing the simple black suit of a planner. He was dressed in a sharp, custom-tailored gray suit, a stark contrast to the deferential employee Madison would later berate. Before him sat his executive team, Eleanor from legal, David from finance, and Maria from vendor relations. They were the best in the business, and their loyalty to Marcus was absolute. They had all been with him since the early days when the headquarters was his tiny apartment. "The Harlow-Richardson file," Marcus began, his voice calm and authoritative as he slid a thick binder across the table. "I'll be taking the lead on site for this one myself." A brief, surprised silence filled the room. It had been years since Marcus had personally managed an event from start to finish. He was the CEO, the visionary, the man who steered the ship. He didn't need to be on the ground adjusting centerpieces anymore. David, the finance head, cleared his throat. "Marcus, with all due respect, that's a $500,000 account, but your time is better spent on the new expansion plans. We have a dozen senior planners who can handle this with their eyes closed." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I know. But I ran the initial background and personality assessment on the clients. The groom, Ethan Richardson, is passive. His family is old money, but he avoids conflict. The bride, Madison Harlow, is a different story." He tapped a page in the file. "She has a reputation. 3 different personal assistants have quit in the last 6 months. She's been flagged by 2 different luxury boutiques for her treatment of their staff. There are whispers all over town." Maria, who managed their relationships with hundreds of top-tier vendors, nodded slowly. "I've heard them. The caterer we're using mentioned that her team found the tasting session unusually tense. She sent back a salmon dish 6 times, claiming the temperature was off by a degree." "Exactly," Marcus said. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "This company wasn't built just on creating beautiful parties. It was built on a principle. The principle that everyone involved in creating that beauty, from the CEO to the busboy clearing the tables, deserves to be treated with dignity. Reed and Royale has a zero-tolerance policy for abuse, and it is written into every single contract we sign. He looked around the table at his trusted team. I need to see it for myself. I need to go in as a planner, not as the owner. I want to see how the Harlows, and specifically Ms. Harlow, treat the people they believe work for them. How someone treats people they think are beneath them says everything about their character. Eleanor, the head of legal, smiled faintly. She had drafted the very clause he was referring to. The mutual respect clause. It's my favorite piece of legal writing. It gives us the right to terminate any agreement at any time if our staff is subjected to harassment, abuse, or profound disrespect. And that, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a firm, quiet tone, is our insurance policy. Not just for our finances, but for our company's soul. The flashback dissolved, the memory of his own words echoing in his mind. He had known from the very beginning that Madison Harlow was a potential storm. He had walked into that ballroom not as a simple planner, but as a test. He was the guardian of his company's values, going undercover to see if a client was worthy of the art and effort his team poured into their work. Madison had not just failed the test. She had set it on fire. Her scream of "You're fired" was not just an insult to him as a man, but an assault on the core principle upon which he had built his entire empire. He had gone in to assess her character, and she had shown him everything he needed to see. The storm he had predicted had arrived right on schedule. Back at the venue, Lena was in an impossible position. She was standing in the middle of a ballroom that was rapidly devolving from controlled chaos into a full-blown disaster. With Marcus gone, the delicate web of coordination he had so expertly woven was fraying at a dozen different points simultaneously. The vendors, who trusted and respected Marcus, were now adrift, with a screaming, frantic bride as their only point of contact. The head caterer cornered Lena near the kitchens, his face pale with stress. "The salmon is supposed to be served exactly 12 minutes after the main toast," he said, his voice a panicked whisper. "But no one knows when the toast is. The new schedule the bride scribbled on a napkin makes no sense. And the groom's parents, they have a severe nut allergy. Marcus had a separate, dedicated prep area and serving plan for their table. The new staff she hired on the spot yesterday don't know anything about it. This is a massive liability." Moments later, the lead photographer pulled her aside. "Lena, the lighting cues for the first dance are all wrong. The bride keeps demanding more spotlights, but it's washing out all the color. It's going to look terrible in the photos. Marcus had it perfectly balanced. She won't listen to me. She called me a button pusher." Lena felt a wave of dizziness. It was happening. The collapse she had foreseen was beginning. Calls were coming in on her earpiece from every direction. The valet service had run out of parking spots because the overflow lot permit was on Marcus's email. The string quartet was playing the wrong processional music because Madison had screamed at them to just play something classical. Power to the photo booth flickered and died, and nobody knew where the circuit breaker was. She saw Madison across the room berating the DJ. The bride's face was flushed, her perfect makeup starting to look strained. She was bragging to one of her bridesmaids, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I handled it. I personally fired that incompetent planner. You just have to be firm with these people, or they'll walk all over you." Her words dripped with a smug, prejudiced entitlement. She was proud of her cruelty, seeing it as a sign of strength. Guests standing nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks. The whispers were no longer just about the firing. They were about the bride herself. Her behavior was becoming the main event, and it was not a pretty sight. Torn between her duty to the event and her loyalty to Marcus, Lena felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. She couldn't let Marcus's name be tarnished by this disaster. And more importantly, she couldn't stand by and watch her boss, a man she respected deeply, be slandered by this arrogant woman. She needed to do something. Making a decision, she slipped away from the ballroom, finding a quiet alcove near the coat check. Her hands were trembling as she pulled out her phone and dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring. "Lena," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "Marcus, it's a catastrophe," she whispered, her voice cracking with stress. "Everything is falling apart. The catering, the music, the lighting. It's all a mess. Madison is making it worse. She's telling people you were incompetent." She could hear him take a slow breath on the other end of the line. She expected him to be angry, to be frustrated. Instead, he sounded resolved. "Don't worry about what she's saying, Lena, and don't worry about the event." "But they need you," she insisted softly. "It's your company's reputation on the line." "No, Lena," he corrected her gently but firmly. "This is bigger than one wedding. This is about our reputation, but not in the way you think. Our reputation is built on respect, and today we are going to defend it. I am handling things from the top. Just do your best to keep people safe, especially with that allergy issue. But do not, under any circumstances, try to fix the problems Madison created. Let her see the consequences of her actions." Lena fell silent, a wave of understanding washing over her. This wasn't about salvaging the wedding. This was about teaching a lesson. Marcus was not just a planner who had walked off the job. He was a CEO making a calculated, strategic move. He was handling it from the top. A chill ran down her spine as she began to grasp the true scale of what was about to happen. She hung up the phone, her fear replaced by a new, steely sense of purpose. She walked back toward the ballroom, no longer an assistant trying to patch a sinking ship, but a quiet observer about to witness justice unfold. While the Harlow-Richardson wedding was descending into chaos, a very different kind of scene was unfolding miles away, in the serene, climate-controlled quiet of the Reed and Royal headquarters. Marcus walked into the executive boardroom, the same room where he had warned his team about Madison Harlow just a week ago. This time his face was grim, but his purpose was clear. His core management team, Eleanor, David, and Maria, were already assembled, summoned by an urgent text. They looked at him with concern, sensing the gravity of the situation. Marcus stood at the head of the obsidian table, his presence commanding the room. He didn't sit down. He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze steady and unwavering. "As of 30 minutes ago, the Harlow-Richardson contract has been terminated," he announced, his voice calm but laced with an undeniable finality. The statement landed in the silent room with the force of a judge's gavel. David, the head of finance, was the first to speak, his brow furrowed with concern. "Terminated? Marcus, that's a $500,000 contract. We're an hour from the ceremony. The cancellation fees alone will be a nightmare. What happened?" Marcus's expression didn't change. "What happened is that our lead planner was publicly humiliated and fired by the bride in front of the entire staff and arriving guests." He let the words sink in for a moment before adding, "And as you know, I was the lead planner." A collective gasp went through the room. Eleanor's eyes widened in disbelief while Maria put a hand to her mouth. They had known he was going undercover, but they had never imagined a scenario like this. "She fired you?" Maria asked, her voice a mixture of shock and outrage. "But why?" "For a centerpiece that was 2 inches off center," Marcus replied flatly. The absurdity of it silenced them. David ran a hand over his face, shaking his head. "So this is it, then. We're invoking Article 7, Section B." "We are," Marcus confirmed. "Eleanor, I already put a hold on the master account. I now need you to execute the full termination protocol. Contact every vendor contracted under the Reed and Royal umbrella for this event. Inform them that our service agreement has been voided due to a client breach. Instruct them to cease all work and vacate the premises immediately. Our insurance will cover their losses. Make it clear that this directive comes from me." Eleanor was already on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm drafting the communications now," she said, her voice all business. "Decor, catering, lighting, sound, valet, floral, and the live stream team. They are all exclusive partners. They will comply." "Good," Marcus said, turning his attention to Maria. "I need you to handle the fallout with our partners. Reassure them that Reed and Royale stands with them and that we will always protect them from abusive clients. This isn't a loss for us. It's a statement. It's an investment in the culture we've built." Maria nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "They'll understand. They'll be grateful. They've all dealt with clients like her. No one has ever had the courage to do this." The news began to ripple across the city's elite event industry almost instantly. A series of quiet professional phone calls and emails set off a chain reaction. The lead decorator, who was in his van just outside the venue waiting for the cue to set up the reception hall's evening ambiance, received the email from Eleanor. He read it, a slow smile spreading across his face. He put the van in gear and drove away. The head caterer, in the midst of a frantic attempt to manage the allergy crisis, received the call. He calmly instructed his staff to begin packing up. "We're done here," he told his confused sous chef. "The contract has been pulled." Inside the ballroom, the sound technicians from the audiovisual company began to quietly unplug their equipment. Marcus stood in his boardroom, a general watching the pieces of his strategy move into place. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout or rage. He simply and quietly dismantled the $500,000 wedding with a series of precise surgical commands. He was wielding his power not through anger, but through the unshakable enforcement of his own rules. The message was clear, and it was spreading like wildfire. If you wanted the magic of a Reed and Royale event, you had to respect the magicians. He looked out the panoramic window at the sprawling city below. "We don't serve those who disrespect our people," he stated, his voice quiet but resonant. "No contract is worth our dignity." The words hung in the air, a declaration of the principle upon which his entire empire stood. The reckoning was no longer quiet. It was now in motion, and it was heading straight for Madison Harlow. Back at the Grand Imperial Ballroom, the first wave of the tsunami hit. The sound technicians, having unplugged their mixing board, began to wheel it towards the exit. Madison, who was in the middle of a heated argument with the photographer, noticed the movement out of the corner of her eye. "Where do you think you're going?" she shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. "The party hasn't even started." The lead technician, a man with a calm demeanor who had worked with Marcus for years, stopped and looked at her. He felt no need to be deferential. "Our services are no longer required," he said simply. "We've been instructed to clear out." "Instructed by who?" Madison demanded, her face turning a blotchy red. "I am the client. I give the instructions." "Our instructions come from Reed and Royale," he replied, and then he and his team continued towards the door, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. That was only the beginning. Moments later, a flurry of activity erupted from the kitchen. The catering staff, led by the head chef, began to wheel out racks of uncooked food. They moved with quiet, efficient purpose, their faces impassive. They were packing up, vanishing. Madison's fiancé, Ethan, who had been trying to placate his increasingly anxious parents, finally strode over to her, his face a mask of confusion and growing anger. "Maddie, what is going on? The caterer just told my mother that the dinner service has been canceled." "Canceled?" Madison repeated, her mind struggling to process the information. "That's impossible. I'll sue them." But before she could launch into another tirade, she saw the floral team begin to dismantle the very centerpiece that had started the whole ordeal. They worked quickly, stripping the orchids and hydrangeas from their stands. The decorators, who were supposed to be draping the reception hall in fairy lights, were packing their ladders and leaving. The entire support structure of her perfect wedding was being disassembled before her very eyes. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through her armor of arrogance. She grabbed the arm of the departing head florist. "You can't leave. I have a contract." The florist, a woman who usually had a warm and friendly demeanor, looked at her with cold eyes. "Our contract is with Reed and Royale, and Reed and Royale has terminated their agreement with you. You should take it up with them." "Then get me the boss of Reed and Royale on the phone right now," Madison screamed, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. "I want to speak to whoever is in charge of this mess." It was Lena who delivered the final devastating blow. She had been standing nearby, watching the chaos unfold with a quiet, somber expression. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "You did speak to him, Madison." Madison spun around to face her, her eyes wild. "What are you talking about?" "The boss," Lena said, her voice clear and unwavering, cutting through the noise of the unraveling event. "The owner of Reed and Royale. The man you just screamed at and humiliated in front of everyone. The incompetent planner you fired. That was him. That was Marcus Reed." The color drained from Madison's face. It happened instantly, as if a switch had been flipped, leaving her skin a pale, ghostly white. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The air seemed to rush out of her lungs. The reality of the situation crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. The man she had dismissed so cruelly, the man she had belittled and fired over a flower arrangement, was not just an employee. He was the owner, the king of the very empire she had paid a fortune to access. Her fiancé, Ethan, stared at her, his eyes wide with horror and dawning comprehension. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You fired Marcus Reed? The Marcus Reed?" Madison couldn't speak. She could only stand there, frozen, as the world she had so carefully constructed crumbled into dust around her. Guests were arriving in greater numbers now, stepping into a ballroom that was not being set up for a celebration but being torn down. They murmured amongst themselves, their confusion turning to shocked realization as the story spread through the room like a contagion. Madison, the perfect bride, had not just thrown a tantrum. She had insulted the one man who held the power to give her the wedding of her dreams. And in doing so, she had single-handedly destroyed it all. Her desperate attempts to save face, to deny everything, were useless. The damage was done, and it was catastrophic. Marcus sat in the quiet of his office, the skyline of the city spread out before him like a kingdom. The chaos of the wedding venue felt a world away. He wasn't tracking the minute-by-minute collapse. He didn't need to. He had set the consequences in motion, and he trusted his team to execute his orders. He felt no satisfaction, no joy in Madison's panic. There was only a quiet, somber sense of necessity. His actions were not about revenge. They were about preserving the integrity of his company and the dignity of his employees. It was a painful but necessary surgery to remove a cancer of disrespect. His private line buzzed, the sound soft and unobtrusive. He looked at the caller ID. It was Ethan Richardson, the groom. Marcus let it ring for a moment, collecting his thoughts. Then he answered, his voice perfectly level. "Marcus Reed speaking." There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by the sound of a shaky, inhaled breath. "Mr. Reed, this is Ethan Richardson. I am so sorry. I don't know what to say." Ethan's voice was strained, filled with a desperate, pleading energy. Marcus could hear the frantic sounds of the disintegrating wedding in the background. Raised voices, the clatter of equipment being moved. "I am calling to apologize," Ethan continued, stumbling over his words. "On behalf of Madison, on behalf of both of us, what she did was... it was unacceptable, inexcusable. She was under a lot of pressure, and she behaved horribly. We are deeply, deeply sorry." Marcus listened without interrupting. He noted the apology was for the behavior, for the pressure, but not necessarily for the core belief that had fueled it. It was an apology born of desperation, not true remorse. "Is there anything we can do?" Ethan pleaded, his voice cracking. "Anything at all to salvage this? Name your price. We'll pay double. We just want to get married, please." Marcus paused, letting the silence stretch. He wanted his next words to have weight, to be clear and unambiguous. "Thank you for the apology, Ethan," he said, his voice calm and measured. "But this was never about money." He let that statement hang in the air for a moment. "I believe in second chances," he continued slowly. But I do not believe in giving them at the expense of self-respect or the respect of my team. We have a code of conduct at my company. It applies to our employees and it applies to our clients. Your fiancée violated that code in the most public and insulting way imaginable. I know, Ethan said quickly. And she'll apologize. She'll do anything. Marcus considered this. An apology from Madison. Would it be genuine? Or would it be another performance, a desperate act to get what she wanted? He decided there was only one way to find out. There was one final test for her to pass, or fail. One condition, Marcus said, his voice firm. If Madison wishes to apologize, she can do so in person. Not over the phone, not through you, and not at the venue. He paused, delivering the final part of his terms. She will come to my office, today, now. He heard Ethan hesitate on the other end of the line. The groom was likely picturing it. His bride, in her full wedding gown, leaving her own disaster of a wedding to go and beg for forgiveness from the man she had so publicly scorned. It was the ultimate humiliation, the complete reversal of power. I'll talk to her, Ethan stammered, his voice filled with uncertainty. You do that, Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. He ended the call, his calm voice hinting at a closure that was not yet complete. He leaned back in his chair, looking out at the vast cityscape. He had offered a path to redemption, however narrow. The next move was Madison's. Let's see if she's learned anything at all, he murmured to the empty room. Madison stormed back into the ballroom, her face a thunderous mask of fury and denial. But the sight that greeted her stopped her cold. The room was no longer just chaotic. It was becoming desolate. The grand, flower-laden arch that was meant to frame her vows was being carefully taken apart, piece by piece. The long white runner for the aisle was being rolled up. The catering staff was gone entirely, leaving behind empty warming stations and a profound silence where the clatter of plates and silverware should have been. More than half of the decorations had vanished. Guests huddled in confused, whispering groups. Some were already starting to leave, shaking their heads in disbelief. The fairy tale had collapsed into a public spectacle of failure. Her perfect day was a ruin, and she was the architect of the destruction. She desperately pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she tried to call the vendors directly. The caterer, the florist, the decorator, every call went straight to voicemail. They had been given their orders, they had been paid for their trouble and released from their obligation. They had blocked her number. She was cut off, isolated in the disaster of her own making. Ethan confronted her near the empty stage where the band was supposed to be setting up. His face, once just uncomfortable, was now etched with a cold, hard anger she had never seen before. The passive man she could always control was gone. "Tell me the truth, Madison," he demanded, his voice low and intense. "Did you really fire the owner of the entire company?" She opened her mouth to lie, to spin a story, to blame someone, anyone else. But she looked into his eyes and saw that he already knew the answer. The fight went out of her, her shoulders slumped. Her silence was a confession, more damning than any words could be. The full weight of her humiliation crashed down on her. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about her reputation. It was about the dozens of influential guests who were now witnessing this catastrophic failure. It was about the stories that would be told for years to come. She had tried to project an image of power and control, but she had only revealed herself to be a petty, self-sabotaging fool. She had destroyed her own wedding. Just then, Lena walked back into the ballroom. She was there to collect her personal items before leaving. Madison saw her, and for the first time that day, the arrogance in her eyes was replaced by something else. Raw, undiluted desperation. Her carefully constructed facade had shattered, leaving only the panicked, spoiled child beneath. She rushed over to Lena, grabbing her arm. Her touch was no longer commanding, but pleading. "Please," Madison whispered, her voice hoarse and on the verge of tears. The sound was so different from the shriek she had used to fire Marcus that Lena almost didn't recognize it. You have to help me. Can you get him back? Can you call him? I'll do anything." Lena looked at the bride, at her tear-streaked face and her ruined, impossibly expensive dress. She felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Marcus's calm, dignified face as he walked out of the ballroom. Madison wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry for the consequences. "He's expecting you to apologize," Lena said, her voice neutral. She relayed the message from Ethan's call, which he had quickly passed on to her. Madison would have to go to Marcus. The last dregs of Madison's pride fought against the idea. "Go to him? He should come here," she started to say, the old arrogance flaring up for a moment. Ethan cut her off, his voice sharp. "No, Madison, you will go to him. This is your mess. You will clean it up, or there will be no wedding. Not today, not ever." The finality in his tone terrified her. She looked from Ethan's furious face to Lena's impassive one, and she knew she had no choice. Defeated, she nodded, a single tear finally tracing a path through her perfect foundation makeup. Lena watched Madison for a moment, then turned and walked away to a quiet corner. She pulled out her phone and made the call. "Marcus," she said when he answered. "It's Lena. She's coming. Madison wants to apologize." Marcus listened on the other end of the line. He felt no triumph, only a grim sense of resolution. "Thank you, Lena. Let her come. We'll be ready for her." He had agreed to the meeting, but it would not be a simple apology and a quick fix. It would be a final accounting. He instructed Lena to have Madison meet him not at the venue, a place of public spectacle, but at the Reed and Royale headquarters, a place of his power. Madison reluctantly agreed. There was no fight left in her. Accompanied by a silent, furious Ethan, she walked out of her own wedding, leaving the remaining guests to whisper and stare. The journey to the downtown office was silent and excruciating. Madison sat in the back of Ethan's luxury car, still dressed in her magnificent wedding gown. The white silk, meant to be a symbol of joy and new beginnings, now felt like a costume for a tragic play. Her makeup, once flawlessly applied, was now running from the stress and the tears she could no longer hold back. The contrast between her shattered glamour and the cold corporate reality she was heading toward was stark. She was a fallen queen on her way to surrender to the very man she had tried to banish from her kingdom. She was no longer the one giving orders. She was the one being summoned. The stage was set for the final, humbling reveal. The elevator ride to the top floor of the Reed and Royal skyscraper was silent and swift. Madison stood in the polished steel box, her reflection a ghostly image in the mirrored walls. Her wedding dress seemed to take up all the space, its voluminous skirt crushed against the sides. Ethan stood beside her, his arms crossed, his face a grim, unreadable mask. The cheerful ding of the elevator arriving at the penthouse floor sounded like a death knell. The doors opened onto a reception area that was the epitome of understated power. It was all glass, steel, and muted grays. A polite receptionist directed them down a long hallway towards a set of imposing glass doors. Through them, Madison could see a large, sun-drenched boardroom. She took a deep breath and pushed the doors open. The scene inside made her freeze in the doorway. At the far end of a long, gleaming obsidian table stood Marcus Reed. He was not the man she had fired. The simple black planner's suit was gone. In its place was a tailored navy suit that fit him perfectly, exuding an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. He wasn't alone. Lined up on either side of him were his executives. The sharp-eyed woman she would later learn was his head of legal, the serious man who ran his finances, and the impeccably dressed woman who managed his vast network of vendors. They all looked at her, their expressions professional but unyielding. This wasn't a meeting with a planner. This was an audience with a board of directors. This was a king in his court. Her jaw dropped. The reality she had been struggling to comprehend finally hit her with the force of a physical impact. The man she had screamed at, the man she had called incompetent, the man she had dismissed like a piece of trash, was the CEO, the master of this entire universe. He was everything, and she had treated him like he was nothing. Marcus gestured to a single empty chair on the opposite side of the table. It was a clear, silent command. "Please, Madison, sit." His voice was calm, the same calm voice he had used in the ballroom, but now it carried a different weight. It was the calm of absolute power. Numbly, Madison moved to the chair and sat, her massive gown puffing up around her. Ethan remained standing by the door, a silent witness. Marcus did not sit. He remained standing at the head of the table, looking down at her. "An hour ago," he began, his voice even and devoid of emotion, "you fired me for a misplaced flower." He paused, letting the simple, absurd fact hang in the air between them. "But what you really dismissed was not an employee. It was not a mistake. What you dismissed was the value of respect. You assumed that because I was there to serve you, I was beneath you. You assumed that the money you paid gave you the right to humiliate another human being." He began to walk slowly along the side of the table, his presence filling the room. "My company, Reed and Royale, is more than a business that plans parties. It is a family of artists, creators, and professionals. We are built on a foundation of mutual respect. It is the first and most important clause in every contract we sign. A clause," he added, stopping to look directly at her, "that you violated." He nodded to Eleanor, his head of legal. She slid a copy of the contract across the table towards Madison. A single clause was highlighted in yellow, the mutual respect and dignity clause. Madison stared at the words, but they were a blur. The full scope of her arrogance, of her catastrophic misjudgment, was washing over her in waves of nausea and shame. She had not just lost her planner. She had breached a contract with one of the most powerful event companies in the country. She had not just ruined her wedding. She had destroyed her own reputation with a single ugly act of prejudice. The camera of her memory lingered on her own screaming face, and for the first time she saw herself as everyone else had seen her that day. A petty tyrant, drunk on a fleeting sense of power. The realization was complete, and it was devastating. The fallout was immediate and brutal. News of the wedding's spectacular collapse spread through the city's elite circles like wildfire, but it didn't stop there. Several guests, appalled by Madison's behavior, had discreetly recorded her screaming at Marcus and other staff members. Within hours, those short, damning video clips hit the internet. The story went viral. It was a perfect storm of social media schadenfreude, a beautiful, wealthy bride-to-be, a lavish wedding, and an ugly display of entitlement. The headlines wrote themselves: "Bridezilla fires wedding planner, accidentally fires CEO of entire company. Watch. Millionaire bride's meltdown cancels her own $500,000 wedding." The clips were viewed millions of times. Madison Harlow became an overnight symbol of arrogance and disrespect. The public consequences were swift. Madison was a minor social media influencer, with a handful of brand sponsorships for lifestyle and beauty products. One by one, they dropped her. In public statements, they cited a commitment to values of kindness and respect. The vendors she had used outside of the Reed and Royale network, the dress designer, the jeweler, distanced themselves from her, fearing the negative association. Her name was toxic. The wedding was, of course, officially canceled. There was nothing left to salvage. But the most significant consequence was personal. Ethan, who had stood by silently at first, could no longer ignore the truth of who he was about to marry. The public humiliation was one thing, but the glimpse into Madison's true character was something he couldn't unsee. He saw her not as a stressed bride, but as a cruel and deeply prejudiced person. A few days after the disastrous event, he walked away. He called off not just the wedding, but the engagement. He could not, he told her, marry someone who was capable of treating another human being that way. Meanwhile, a different story was unfolding at Reed and Royale. The incident, rather than damaging the company's reputation, enhanced it. Marcus's decisive action became a legend in the event industry. He was hailed as a hero by service workers everywhere, a boss who literally put his company's money where its mouth was, choosing dignity over a massive contract. Vendor applications to partner with Reed and Royale skyrocketed. The best talent in the city wanted to work for a company that had their back. Marcus didn't waste time celebrating. He focused on his people. He called a company-wide meeting, and in front of everyone, he promoted Lena Cruz to senior event coordinator. He praised her for her loyalty, her clear-headedness under pressure, and her moral courage. "Lena represents the best of this company," Marcus announced to the cheering staff. "She understands that our work is not just about logistics, it's about integrity." The promotion was a clear message to everyone. In the culture of Reed and Royale, it was character, not cruelty, that was rewarded. A quiet celebration rippled through the company. It was a victory, not over a difficult client, but for the very soul of their work. Respect had won. Weeks later, the warm afternoon sun streamed into a different venue, a beautiful, sun-drenched vineyard nestled in the countryside. The atmosphere here was the polar opposite of the grand imperial ballroom. It was filled with a sense of calm, joy, and genuine warmth. Marcus Reed stood quietly in the background, observing the final preparations. He was dressed in his simple black planner's suit once again, a small smile playing on his lips. This wedding was for a different kind of client. A young couple, a doctor and a teacher who had saved for years for this day. From the very beginning, they had treated every single person involved with kindness and gratitude. They knew the names of the waiters. They brought coffee for the floral team. They thanked the sound technician for his hard work. They saw the people behind the services, and in doing so, they had earned the absolute best from the Reed and Royale team. The staff worked with a passion and dedication that no amount of money could buy. They were not just doing a job, they were helping to celebrate the love of two good people. As the bride, in a simple but elegant dress, prepared to walk down the aisle, she caught Marcus's eye. She smiled at him, a bright, genuine smile. "Thank you for everything, Marcus," she said. "It's more perfect than we ever could have dreamed." Marcus simply nodded, his heart full. This was why he had built his company. Not for the lavish parties or the high-profile clients, but for this, for the creation of beautiful moments for people who deserve them. Power isn't shown by how loud you shout or by the money you can spend. True power is revealed in how you treat the people who are there to help you, the people who serve you. Arrogance is a debt that always comes due, and it always costs more than money. True luxury is not found in expensive things, but in the simple, priceless act of human respect. The camera of the mind closes on Marcus watching the happy couple say their vows. He is not the center of attention. He is a quiet guardian of the moment, a man who knows his own worth, his dignity intact, a silent architect of joy. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.